The coffee shop on Maple Street. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday morning, turning the streets of Portland into rivers of gray. Marcus Chen stood under the awning of the boarded-up storefront on Maple Street, his jacket soaked through despite his best efforts to stay dry. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper with an address scrawled across it in his sister's handwriting. This was it, 847 Maple Street. His last chance. 3 months ago, Marcus had been a sous chef at one of downtown's most prestigious restaurants. He'd had an apartment with a view of the Willamette River, a girlfriend who worked in tech, and a future that seemed as bright as the gleaming kitchen he worked in every night. Then came the accident, a car crash that wasn't his fault but left him with a broken leg, mounting medical bills, and an employer who couldn't hold his position indefinitely. One thing led to another. Lost job, lost apartment, lost relationship. Now, he was 32 years old and starting over with nothing but a duffel bag and his sister's belief that he could rebuild. "You're here about the apartment?" Marcus turned to find an elderly woman standing in the doorway of the building next door, an umbrella barely protecting her silver hair from the downpour. She wore a cardigan covered in cat hair and glasses that magnified her eyes to an almost comical degree. Actually, I'm looking for the space for rent." "I know. Your sister called me last week. I'm Dorothy Winters. I own this building and the coffee shop next door." She gestured to the boarded-up storefront. "Well, what used to be a coffee shop. Come on, let's get you out of this weather." Dorothy led him through a side door and up a narrow staircase. The apartment above the defunct coffee shop was small, a studio with slanted ceilings, a kitchenette that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1975, and a bathroom with tiles that might have once been white, but it had large windows that faced the street, hardwood floors that creaked with character, and most importantly, rent that Marcus could barely afford with the disability checks he was still receiving. "I'll be honest with you, Marcus," Dorothy said, settling into the apartment's only chair with a sigh. "I've had a hard time renting this place. Most folks take one look at that boarded-up shop downstairs and keep walking. Bad energy, they say. Reminds them of failure." She paused, studying him with those magnified eyes. "Your sister said you might understand something about that." Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks. "She told you only that you'd had some hard times and needed a fresh start. Nothing to be ashamed of. We've all been there." Dorothy stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. "That coffee shop was my husband's dream. Frank opened it 40 years ago, right after we got married. Best coffee in the neighborhood, everyone said. But Frank passed 2 years ago, and I couldn't keep it going alone. I've been too scared to do anything with it. Couldn't bear to sell it. Couldn't bear to reopen it." "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. Dorothy turned back to him, and there was something fierce in her expression. "Here's what I'm thinking. You can have the apartment for half the listed rent, on one condition. You help me figure out what to do with that space downstairs. I need someone with fresh eyes, someone who understands what it's like to have to rebuild." "Your sister mentioned you were a chef?" "I was. Then you know about creating something from nothing, about taking raw ingredients and turning them into something that brings people joy." She extended a weathered hand. "What do you say? Want to help an old woman figure out her next chapter?" Marcus looked around the small apartment again. Through the window, he could see the rain beginning to let up, weak sunlight breaking through the clouds. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He shook Dorothy's hand. "I say yes." The first week, Marcus just cleaned. He swept the apartment until his arms ached, scrubbed the bathroom tiles until they gleamed, and slowly unpacked his meager belongings. At night, he would lie awake on the air mattress his sister had bought him, listening to the sounds of the city outside his window, and wonder if he'd made a mistake. The doubt was a familiar companion these days. But in the mornings, Dorothy would knock on his door with coffee and pastries from the bakery down the street, and they would sit in the apartment, or venture downstairs to the shuttered coffee shop, talking about possibilities. Frank always said this neighborhood was special, Dorothy told him one morning as they stood in the dusty shop, surveying the space. He believed in community, in creating a place where people felt like they belonged. That's what made the coffee shop work. It wasn't just about the drinks, it was about the connections. Marcus walked around the space, his chef's eye noting the good bones beneath the abandonment. The original espresso machine was still there, an ancient but beautiful Italian model that would probably still work with some restoration. The counters were solid wood. The layout was actually quite smart, with good flow from the entrance to the counter to the seating area. What if we didn't reopen it as just a coffee shop? Marcus heard himself say. The idea had been forming in his mind all week, crystallizing into something he could almost reach out and touch. What if we made it something more? A community kitchen, maybe. Coffee and pastries in the morning, light lunch service, but also a place where people could take cooking classes, where local artists could display their work, where the neighborhood could gather. Dorothy's eyes lit up behind her thick glasses. A community kitchen. Frank would have loved that. Then her expression fell. But Marcus, I don't have the money for a full renovation, after Frank's medical bills. We don't need a full renovation, Marcus said, his mind racing now, the old creative energy starting to flow again. We work with what we have. We make it part of the charm. Vintage, authentic, real. We get the neighborhood involved. Maybe some folks can help with repairs in exchange for free classes or meals. We start small and grow organically. You really think it could? With cookbooks and community flyers. Dorothy worked beside them every day, her energy seemingly endless despite her age. She sorted through boxes of Frank's old records and played jazz over a donated speaker system. She told stories about the coffee shop's glory days, about the regulars who'd come in every morning, about the marriage proposals and business deals and friendships that had been forged over Frank's perfectly pulled espresso shots. At night, Marcus would climb the stairs to his small apartment, exhausted but satisfied in a way he hadn't been in years. He started cooking again, experimenting with recipes in his tiny kitchenette, planning menus for the community kitchen. He called his sister and told her about the progress, hearing the pride in her voice even over the phone. I knew you could do this, she said. I never doubted you for a second. I doubted myself plenty, Marcus admitted. That's the thing about rock bottom, his sister replied. It's solid. You can build on it. 3 months after Marcus had arrived on Maple Street, they held a soft opening. Just neighbors and people who'd helped with the renovation. Dorothy stood at the front of the room, tears streaming down her face, and raised a cup of coffee and a toast. To Frank, she said, her voice wavering but strong, who taught me that the best things in life are meant to be shared, and to Marcus, who reminded me that it's never too late to begin again. Marcus felt his own eyes burning as everyone raised their cups. He looked around the room at the faces that had become familiar over the past months. James, who taught him that asking for help wasn't weakness but wisdom. Maria and Miguel, who'd shown him that everyone carries invisible burdens and deserves compassion. Dorothy, who'd seen something in him worth believing in when he couldn't see it himself. The official opening came a week later. Marcus woke before dawn, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. He dressed carefully, pulling on the chef's jacket he hadn't worn since the accident, and headed downstairs to begin prep. The morning rush exceeded their wildest expectations. People poured in for coffee and pastries, stayed for conversation and connection. By noon, they'd sold out of the lunch specials Marcus had prepared. By evening, they had a waiting list for the cooking classes they'd scheduled for the following month. But the moment that stuck with Marcus came in the afternoon. Miguel showed up, not to help clean or paint, but to shyly ask if Marcus might teach him some basic knife skills. My mom's birthday is next month, the teenager explained, not quite meeting Marcus's eyes. I want to cook her a real dinner, something special. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, the last piece of armor he'd been carrying. Yeah, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Yeah, I can teach you that. Come by tomorrow after school. We'll start with the basics. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the community kitchen at closing time, wiping down counters and reflecting on how much had changed. The space was thriving. They'd expanded their hours, hired 2 part-time employees, and were even turning a small profit. More importantly, it had become exactly what Dorothy and Frank had dreamed of. A gathering place, a hub of connection in a neighborhood that desperately needed one. But the real transformation, Marcus knew, wasn't the space. It was him. He'd learned to ask for help when he needed it. He'd learned that failure wasn't fatal, that rock bottom could be a foundation rather than an ending. He'd learned that sometimes the life you're meant to live isn't the one you planned, but the one you build from the pieces of what came before. Dorothy joined him in the kitchen. moving slower these days but still sharp as ever. Frank would be so proud, she said softly, looking around at what they'd created. Not just of the space, but of you, of who you've become. I'm just trying to pay forward what you gave me, Marcus said. What we gave each other, Dorothy corrected. That's the thing about second chances, Marcus. They work best when we share them. Through the window, Marcus could see the evening settling over Maple Street. Streetlights flickered on. People hurried home to their families. Somewhere in the city, someone else was probably hitting their own rock bottom, wondering if they'd ever find their way back up. Marcus thought about that person, whoever they were, and he hoped they'd find their own version of 847 Maple Street. Their own Dorothy, their own Miguel, their own chance to discover that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what truly matters. He turned off the lights, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to his small apartment. Tomorrow, they'd do it all again. They'd brew coffee and cook meals and build community. They'd offer second chances and accept them in return. And that, Marcus had learned, was more than enough. That was everything.